So the question is, the city obviously doesn't govern that, but there is a city schools committee, and if I were on city council or in the mayor's seat, I think I'd be monitoring it and trying to maybe poke my head in. I realize that the city and the district meet on the same nights, but there's 6 other nights of the week plus the days. Has the city done enough to try and help out the schools, or try and head off what's happening, or have we been too laissez-faire? Jeff, why don't you start off on that?
I know that, legally and governmentally, we have no control over the District 65. At the same time, as we've heard from many people, as go the schools, so goes the city. And certainly District 65 plays a huge role in the quality of life here in Evanston and the ability to attract people to come to Evanston. So I think that we are well within our rights governmentally and as mayor to sound the alarm, to express our distress and worries vocally and publicly to the district, to work with them also as well to bring us to this point. You mentioned the City Schools Committee, and if you look back at the agenda of that group over the last few years, they meet 2 or 3 times a year, and they've never ever addressed District 65's situation at all. I sat in on a meeting there about a month or so ago, and we talked about replacing the boiler at one of the schools, and nobody said anything about District 65's, plan to restructure themselves and recover from where they are. So I think it would be in our best interest to work with them to provide whatever support we can that's not financial. We already provide a great deal of financial support to them if we can, and if we can't help them directly, then broker that help from somewhere else to see if we can improve. And I'm think about, we have a great educational facility in this city, that if we could get them to see the PR possibilities of helping a K through 8, K through 8 district nearby, they might benefit from that as well too.
Yeah, I think the premise of the question is just right. The schools are the beating heart of the community. One of us is going to have some fancy title in a few months, but really, the schools are what make the community what it is and what makes the community desirable. And our success as a city relies on the success of the schools. So what can we do? There's some very, very concrete things that we can do. I'm proud of the fact that the agreement that we ultimately reached with Northwestern relative to the rebuilding of Ryan Field included 15 years of funding for our public school districts. It was something that we pushed for as a city government, knowing that it wouldn't help us balance our own budget, but it would help this community. I worked after the 5/5 TIF passed to negotiate agreements with the school districts about certain buildings that were coming online onto the tax rolls to make sure that that process didn't negatively affect the budgets of District 65 or, for that matter, District 202. We work on a bunch of technical little things with the school district, whether it's about crossing guards, whether it's about permitting, as they're working to build a new building. We see our role as being key partners with them in effectively serving our shared constituents, and right now, helping them manage a difficult problem. Now let's be real. There's an election coming up where a new majority of District 65's board will be elected, and that's an opportunity, frankly, for a new tone in the relationship between the city and the school district. If I'm lucky enough to be re-elected on April 1st, I'm going to be on the phone on April 2nd with 4 new school board members of District 65. I already talk, of course, with Dr. Turner on a regular basis, but deepening that relationship and improving that collaboration is pivotal. Finally, I'm running out of time. But we don't have control, but we do have a bully pulpit. I'm very careful about how to use it, but I do use it, and I've used it to effect. For instance, when Bessie Rhodes announced abruptly they were about to shut down 7th and 8th grade in the middle of the fall, Mayor Skokie and I together wrote a letter to the school district that was part of causing them to reverse their position. And so we got to be careful about when to use that bully pulpit, because there's only so much influence that we have, but we have to use it wisely, and I think I've done that.
Jeff, Daniel ran a little bit over. If you want to take 20 seconds.
But why not? Always good, always a good taste, the spit take. All right. Again, I think we missed an opportunity to be louder, stronger, earlier, and to let people know that we were involved in trying to help. That the district and the school district burned through $80 million in a few years, and certainly the board there is most culpable, those people, for not keeping their eye on the ball. But that should have distressed us as a city sooner, and we should have voiced that concern, I think, with them. And so going forward, I would say whomever is mayor, in meeting with Superintendent Turner, ought to be reporting out on where that's at and how things are going, and demonstrating a partnership with District 65.
I'm going to show my age here a little bit. I remember when there was a debate involving affirmative action, and the word quotas used to be used, and there was eventually litigation that went to the Supreme Court, and it was in the course of that litigation that the, quote, diversity, unquote, defense came up. Diversity was not always this public aspiration or goal the way that it is used certainly in Evanston politics now. It was, the Supreme Court said, I believe, to the University of Michigan or California, that it's something you can consider, so you can do that. Now the Trump administration has issued orders to get rid of DEI, etc. My question for you guys is, in Evanston, we see it, especially in the school races, diversity, diversity, diversity. We probably use the word diversity more per capita than almost any other community. Yet, our black population has been shrinking over the last several censuses. So it's sort of a two-part question. A, is diversity something we should be trying to engineer at all? And B, if it is, are we overemphasizing it? Are we not doing enough? Or are we setting that perfect Goldilocks, middle bowl of porridge level on it? And Daniel, why don't you go first?
No, I'm just collecting myself. No, and the mic's not working. Can you hear me? Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate that you asked this question, Jeff. I mean, what a moment that we're in. What a unthinkable attack on the values that, in my opinion, make Evanston that are coming at us. And what an opportunity we have to stand up for our values in a time of choosing. In a time when a lot of people in this country are looking around and figuring out, maybe it's better for me to keep my head down and keep my mouth shut, and I'll be safer. So when I'm mayor, that's not going to be our approach ever. We're going to stand up for our values. We're going to continue to fight for diversity. We're going to talk about equity. We're going to talk about inclusion. We're going to continue doing reparations. We're going to continue fundamentally leaning in on these values that, in my opinion, are the core of what we are. The core of what we are. So do we talk about it too much? No. I think the diversity of this community is fundamentally what sets it apart from so many other places, and that diversity is best felt when it occurs in every neighborhood. And so, on the Goldilocks question, I guess I would say that we're probably talking about it enough and acting on it not enough. And that's, we're not supposed to clap, but thank you. And that view is what drives my passion for getting the Envision Evanston process right, a process that at its core is about facilitating diversity of housing stock across the city, and therefore facilitating socioeconomic diversity across the city. And it matches what we've done in so many things, from our guaranteed income programs to the rental assistance work we do to our reparations work. So I think this is rightly at the center of our vocabulary. I think it's been at the center of a lot of our action, and it needs to be at the center of more.
the city's commitment to diversity is very authentic and genuine. Many people say all the time that it's one of the things they love about the city. In fact, it's one of the things that they moved here for. So it is an asset, it's part of our character, it's part of our makeup, it's part of who we are. So I will make sure that the city maintains its commitment, its full commitment, whether that's in writing, whether it's in any way that we have that as well. On top of that, though, I know from my work in corporations and on nonprofit boards, the value of diversity of thought and participation. It makes every organization stronger. It makes the city stronger as well, too. So we will not give up our commitment to diversity. We will talk about it, and we will make sure that we're acting on it with our full strength and our energy, and really try to bring alive both daily and in every practical way our commitment to diversity and reap the benefits of that too.
That leads into another question, Danny. You mentioned diversity in housing stock, but what about diversity between neighborhoods? The two of you may not have been attending all land use commission meetings on this, but many people have been speaking up, and one of the questions was, is there any particular reason why the 6th Ward needs to look like the 4th Ward, or the people in the blocks around here aren't going to Maple and Sherman and south of Church and saying, well, we want to knock this down and make it look more like the 6th Ward. I mean, does everything have to be homogeneous, or can there be a diversity of neighborhoods within a community? I mean, I'll toss this out as just as devil's advocate that people of many cultural orientations in America have the idea of moving to a better neighborhood. Should there not be any better neighborhoods? Should everything be the same? Or should we allow and even encourage and celebrate that there are different kinds of neighborhoods in Evanston? Who took the last one first? You and Jeff?
Absolutely, there are a variety of neighborhoods in Evanston, and they all have their own character. I was talking to some people the other day. Character is what real estate agents sell. People say, oh, I want a tree-lined street. I want something that's kind of funky and urban. And then you go out with a real estate agent, and they pull into a neighborhood and go, oh, this is just what we were thinking of. So it's so tangible, it can hit them like that, how visual it is. And so we need to maintain that as well. It's one of the things that we love about Evanston too, is that we have such a variety of these neighborhoods around here as well. And even when you think about particular areas, you think about downtown. Downtown has its own neighborhoods. Chicago and Davis is different than Maple and Davis, which is different than Maple and Grove. So all of these things are different, and we can utilize that really to make more out of what they are. So I think these needs to be certainly nuanced and cherished, and we look at them individually as to how we make each of them thrive and maintain some of that character that they have now, even as they evolve slightly, because nothing ever stays the same, but that change in those neighborhoods is gradual and sort of fitting with what's there already.
So to answer the question directly, neighborhoods are different from each other, and the way a zoning code works is it chops up the city into different little spots on the map and puts different rules in them. And right now in Evanston, there are different R1 neighborhoods that feel really different. The southeast part of Evanston on Hinman, where someone in the second row lives, is zoned R1, but feels really different than Harrison, where you live, Jeff, and that's just natural because neighborhoods evolve over time, and the rules in the zoning code aren't the only thing that govern the aesthetics and culture and the look and the feel. So diversity of neighborhoods is an inevitability. It exists now, it will continue to exist, and it always exists irrespective of what the zoning code says. To me, the value of socioeconomic diversity in every neighborhood is something to strive for. I believe in that. I think it's good for neighborhoods. I think it's good for vibrancy. I agree with Jeff that diversity of thought improves the way we live and improves the way we make decisions. And so I think we should strive to have different types of housing and different people from different socioeconomic status and different races and different walks of life in every neighborhood of Evanston. I think that's of value. I think the idea, respectfully, that we would say, okay, here's the good neighborhoods, and here's the less good neighborhoods, and here's the less good neighborhoods, and there's the less good neighborhood, and life is going to be a series of trying to go boing, boing, boing up the ladder until we win, is not how I think Evanston sees itself. I think every neighborhood in Evanston is great. And I think every neighborhood in Evanston is even greater when it truly reflects the diversity of our whole community. I think that's something that's really, really worth fighting for.
Daniel, you said earlier tonight that more is not necessarily better, and I think that probably applies to a lot of things, but the city of Evanston uses the word growth a lot. Discussions about planning use the word growth. I come to some degree from the 60s and 70s where there was some discussion of limits to growth, and I think somebody said at a council meeting sometime in 2024 that if you're relying on growth to fund operations, you're essentially running a Ponzi scheme. Actually, I think that was me who said it. So, is there a limit to Evanston's growth, or do we have to keep having cranes downtown for the rest of our existence here just in order to make ends meet? Is there some point at which there is an end state at which you say, you're happy, we've arrived, we're in stasis, we're in balance? You see a lot of that in Europe where there, I think, isn't the same striving that comes from this country with the frontier mentality. That'll go off way into the weeds if we get there, but the real question is, to what degree do we have to depend on growth? Is there an end state? Should there be a goal? Folks on the Land Use Commission have been expressing this question quite seriously.
As I said in my questionnaire, the number that I've heard talked about by some, including some at CMAP, is the idea, the projection of likely population growth of about 8,000 over the course of the next couple decades. That strikes me as a very reasonable number, one that would allow for growth of the tax base, one that would bring more students into District 65, which is, by the way, in my opinion, an important objective. One that would bring more customers for our small businesses and continue the revitalization of double fisting out of our business districts. I think it's important to acknowledge that all of these decisions come with trade-offs. That growth brings vibrancy, and when done right, it brings diversity, and it brings kind of more cultural activity, and it brings crowding, and it brings traffic, and all of that is true, and I think we need to find the right trade-offs. But I think for us to take the position that even though we have these fiscal challenges, even though people want to come to Evanston, even though people are being priced out of Evanston right now, and gentrification is resulting in a drop in our Black population decade after decade after decade, even though we want to see our downtown businesses revitalized, even though the property tax burden is really, really crushing for many working families, then notwithstanding that, we can't contemplate growth. I think it's a mistake. I think it's missing out on a pivotal opportunity. And so, there is the opportunity as we think through these issues to continually readjust, to look at those trade-offs and say, what direction ought we be moving over the course of the next 5 years to improve the quality of life in Evanston and best address our issues? And right now, I think we're in a position where we are better off growing than shrinking, and to do that in a way that doesn't send housing costs through the roof requires us to add housing stock.
If you look at the number of units that What did you do to this?
One, two. Did you switch them up, Dan? I've seen you juggle.
Magic.
A juggler, not a magician.
I'm not sure. Right now, on the projected already for Evanston, between Main Street and downtown Evanston are more about 1,200 units between the various buildings, some of which have been approved, some of which have just been proposed. And most of those are, more than half are easily the studios. Another large portion of that is one single bedrooms, and then a smattering of 2 bedrooms, and just a handful of 3 bedrooms. And so if you I think the average people use for that kind of thing is like 1.5 people per unit. That's going to increase the population there about 2,500. So you're a third of the way to that 8,000 already with just what's on the board here in Evanston. And it's one of the things I think we have to work towards, and that hopefully will come as we continue to work on the comprehensive plan, is add some data to this. Software exists that allows you to project what the impact will be on the tax base, on the infrastructure and everything else, and hopefully you can maybe see a sweet spot that says, all right, maybe 8,000 is too many, 2,000 is too little, maybe we could handle 4,000, 6,000 people, something like that. But as the mayor said, it's a trade-off. You have to decide what you want to do. For example, there's a lot of talk about downtown Evanston. We need to add more tall buildings there. The fire department is already saying that they'd like to put another firehouse over on that side of town. So you add several thousand people there, and you're definitely going to need another firehouse, and so that kind of thing needs to be figured into the planning for the infrastructure of what might be right for downtown Evanston, all of Evanston too.
Okay, well, here's a follow-up for either of you, and it may end up being both, because if you have a chance, you might take it. I wrote an article a couple weeks ago where I added up all the units, and I expressed some frustration in the titling of it because it took me so long to get the data, and the city didn't have the data as a baseline on how much building we'd done. But I came up with the figure of 5,600 units since 1996, and actually I was a little under because I forgot to include the Lodge of Evanston and 2300 Greenwood, among others. Bill Smith of Evanston Now today had an article basically coming up with the same numbers, saying 5,000 since the turn of the century. And if you back out the stuff between 1996 and 2000, Bill Smith and I are in agreement, which is sort of like the stars aligning, and so it should be taken as gospel. So my question on that is, if we've been building and building and building, we've added thousands of units, but during that time, Evanston has gotten more expensive and moved in at least some directions away from the diversity we claim to cherish. Why do we think that doing more of the same will have a different result? Either of you can take it.
So, first of all, there's like a math conundrum in here with a simple answer, but it takes you a second, which is that we've got all these additional units, our vacancy rate is very low, and our population is constant because of the way household formation is evolving in America. The per household number of residents is dropping. So that's one important component of this, that if we even want to maintain population, as long as that is the trend in this country, there's a requirement to add some units. I readily acknowledge, and I've said this throughout, and I worry that sometimes I don't say it clearly enough, just changing the zoning and just adding units alone doesn't necessarily guarantee the addition of affordability. You've got to do other things simultaneously. I think it's really important, for example, that we significantly strengthened just last month our inclusionary housing ordinance to ensure that way more affordability will happen, way more affordable units units will be, gosh darn it. Way more affordable units will be generated. I'm going to hold this lower now, and I'm going to assume that my thumb is somehow working against me. I wasted the working mic time on a pointless joke. Terrible mistake.
There is no pointless joke, I gotta tell you.
That was a challenge. So now, thanks to the improvement of the inclusionary housing ordinance, when large developments occur, there will be way more affordable units generated. And of course, the discussions that we're having in this Envision Evanston process aren't only about tall buildings downtown. They're about changing the zoning to allow for more diversity of housing stock. Like the modest townhome that Karen and I and our two kids live in on Central Street, which is one of the only places in our whole neighborhood we could afford because our type of missing middle housing is illegal in almost our whole neighborhood. And so zoning changes alone certainly can't fix everything. In fact, zoning changes by themselves without other smart policy may not fix much, but they create the foundation on which we can address our affordability crisis, which, by the way, doesn't only exist for people whose incomes qualify them for the HUD definition of affordability. We have an affordability crisis for middle-class people, for District 65 teachers, for nurses. We have an affordability crisis for upper middle-class people. We have an affordability crisis for young families trying to figure out how to afford to come here. And we have to address it across the board.
Back on the topic of density, again, I mentioned all the units that are being planned between Main Street and downtown, and much of what is looked at in Envision Evanston follows the notion of transit-oriented development, and so the Chicago Avenue corridor is seen as very prime for this as well too. But as I mentioned, we've seen that the bulk of the housing stock that's coming online there is studios and single bedroom. And so certainly the developers who are putting this up know their market. They know whom they can sell those units to or rent those units to. And so we have to think about some of what was said earlier, that the importance of increasing the density and the population of Evanston is to bring families to Evanston. But those units aren't being built for them. So we need to be thinking about how we can make sure that those type of units are in the mix, as well as so much that's going on with for singles and couples and more transient folks.
Sustainability is one of those words like diversity that if you ask ChatGPT to come up with a candidate platform for somebody running in Evanston, it would be sure to be spit out by the bots. Professor Agha and myself, among others, and there's a growing body of work challenging the thinking about greenhouse gas impact, not just of operations, where much of the focus has been for the last 20 years of this discussion, but of the construction of buildings itself. And I sent along something to public comment in that regard. Jeff, I don't know if you were privy to that, although it's public record. Do either of you have any feelings about that? Are we sufficiently taking the greenhouse gas of construction itself into consideration in our sustainability, or is actually our building helping to push Greenland into the ocean?
Excuse me. There we go. I've heard, Dr. Aga speak about his issue is the height of buildings, and if there's a point at which you're too high, that it becomes no longer green to have a tall building, and it's counterproductive in trying to reduce greenhouse gases as well. And I think that when we're looking at all of these things, we need to keep in mind that it becomes economic as well. And we've heard it from a number of developers and such that, aside from the green, there's the affordability piece with it too, that new construction is not going to be as affordable as what we're replacing. So existing low, affordable housing is going to be more affordable. And when you couple that with the notion that the greenest building is the one that already exists, that helps helps us address our CARP goals and our commitment to sustainability as well. So let's see what we can do to preserve those.
This is an important contribution to the discussion. When we ask ourselves about sustainability, we've got to ask all the different questions and look at all the different factors. I would respectfully say I've heard from a lot of experts who have a different point of view than the one that was mentioned earlier by a person in our community who I have a lot of respect for, because the answer you get depends a lot on the assumptions you make. The assumptions you make about the building techniques. And one of the things that is evolving is the technique by which construction of tall buildings is done is now developing in a way that allows for the utilization of less embodied carbon and so forth. But there's another point here which I think is critical, which explains why so many of the kind of lead environmental advocates and entities, not just in Evanston, but across the state and across the country, are so passionately advocating for these types of zoning changes. And that is that you gotta look at the other part of the equation that's been ignored by both of the discussions so far, which is what happens when you don't build the taller building near transit? Where does the person who would have lived there go? And very often they go to a single family home in McHenry County. They go to the exurbs. They go to a much more car-dependent lifestyle. They go to a place where they're building on open space. And that's got to be taken into account as well. So I support being honest and careful and meticulous and thinking about all the different factors, but if we want to do that, we've got to think about all of them. And finally, I'll just say that according to that analysis, the one thing that everyone agrees on is that missing middle housing is environmentally in the sweet spot. And that's part of why I think it's important that it be a part of our conversation.
Quick yes or no follow-up. Would each of you support an ordinance that requires at least planned development size projects or something over X square feet to calculate and disclose what the greenhouse gas embodied emissions would be?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Another environmental question. It took us 100 years after Daniel Burnham suggested to pass a tree ordinance, a tree protection ordinance. We don't have a light ordinance. You can see Evanston from space, and I don't mean as a speck, but if you look at the light map of the United States, we're in one of the most lit up places on the continent. Can we do something about, do you feel that Evanston's underlit? Or is there something that we can do about what many of us would consider light pollution? There was a whole exhibit on this back when the Art Center was over at Harley Clark a few years ago. I know there's dark skies supporters in Evanston. It has an impact on wildlife. It has an impact on sleep cycles. So it has an impact on kids' grades. It has an impact on mental health. Would either of you support a light pollution ordinance in Evanston?
One of my favorite things about the Central Street Neighbors Association forums is that you are guaranteed to get a question not only that you're not going to get somewhere else, but you probably haven't thought too hard about before. I'm not saying this is the last one of the evening, but we've certainly hit the first one. Look, I'm a huge fan of dark skies. On the occasions that Karen and our kids and I have gone to places and been able to see what the sky looks like away from light pollution, it's magic. It's magic. So that's a conversation I'm happy to have. It's a conversation I'm happy to learn more about and think about what such an ordinance might mean. I do also want to answer the other part of your question, though, which is that there are places in this town that are not well enough lit, and where the fact that the lack of street lighting results in people not feeling safe. That's a problem that we need to address quickly. And I'm certainly interested in finding a way to address it that's consistent with our interest in the problem of light pollution and what it does for, as you said, wildlife, animals, as well as as human animals. But I want to make sure that we're also being serious about the fact that well-lit streets to facilitate safety and to make people feel secure and comfortable being out and about together is not only a practical utilitarian thing. When people feel comfortable being out and about together, that tightens community and it also improves mental well-being.
I too would support an ordinance regarding light pollution and dark skies. And this has come up several times in the same venue. It's sort of a number of the coffees we have regarding safety and people tripping at night and not having enough light on the street. So we've got too much light in Evanston. It's just in the wrong places, apparently. And so we have to find a way to balance, our historic Talmadge lights that we love. It's a symbol of the city. And those lights are not always in the right places, and they kick too much light up into the sky. So we need to find a way to get more light down on the streets, along Ridge. People talk about safety, about bikes zipping across the street in front of them at night, and that sort of thing. So we need better lighting along some of our sidewalks, and certainly along some of the major thoroughfares where we have bikes coming and going so much. So that's going to be a good one to sort out, but we got to get to that.
I've come across a phrase, and I'm not saying it's in either of your campaign literature, but I've seen it in some, as well as even in some third party and maybe even a city document, about how we shouldn't just be listening to, quote, the loudest voices. And I got to tell you, it raises the hair on the back of my neck, because the first thing I think of is Spiro Agnew and talking about the silent majority, and that there's been a subtle put down of people who are activists or protesters, for much of the last half century that I can recall. And it also occurs to me that sometimes people's voices are loud because they're the ones whose toes are getting stepped on at the moment. Do you believe that we overly listen to some people in Evanston, and if so, who? And are we one of the loudest voices here at Central Street Neighbors? Because our library got closed, and the civic center that people fought to preserve looks like it's on its way out from the discussions. Harley Clark got privatized. A lot of things. If we're loud, it doesn't sound like we're being listened to. Daniel, you want to start that off? Who are these mysterious loud voices that have disproportionate influence?
I mean, I don't know, man. Like, I go to every city council meeting, and the participants in public comment don't look like the whole city. That's a fact. I look at the land use commission meetings, and the participants in public comment don't look like the whole city. That's a fact. That's just true. We can't shy away from that. And in my opinion, as the mayor, I work for everybody. It's very popular for politicians to say, I vote for everyone, whether you voted against me or voted for me, which I do, but I vote just as much for you if you didn't vote at all. I work just as much for you if you're not eligible to vote. Maybe you're not a citizen, or you're not 18. I work for everybody. And I care equally about every voice. And I don't expect or ask people to participate if they're not interested. But I also want to make sure that we're getting a view of the residents that's of a piece with what the broad diversity, as we said earlier, of our city. And there's tons of academic research about this. That's not what happens in public meetings. For obvious reasons. Because it's really hard to go to evening meetings if you've got a kindergartner. Because it's really hard to go to evening meetings if you work a night shift. Because it's really hard to go to evening meetings if you don't speak English very well. Those are facts. Those are facts. And if I don't do everything I can to make sure that I'm making decisions for everybody in this community, rather than just those for whom it is easier and more convenient to show up and be heard, then shame on me. Shame on me. I think I have a key responsibility to do that. To listen to everyone for whom it's convenient to show up, to take those points of view seriously and learn from them and engage with them, and to seek out the opinions of everybody else.
I'm sure that there's some algorithm that says for X number of people who show up at the city council meeting, there's X number of people at home who feel the same way and have families and are busy and are working and that kind of thing and can't come and voice their opinion at meetings and such. And to your point about maybe people feeling like their toes are being stepped upon, often at city council, what we're hearing is public reaction. And I think we can do a better job of gathering public input before some of the things come forward. And for example, the leaf blower ordinance was something that came forward, and then there was great blowback, okay, when people started to figure out what the cost might mean and who might be affected by that, okay? The healthy building ordinance just passed and is going on, or hasn't passed, is under consideration, maybe still being developed, and but we're hearing from a lot of building owners who said, gee, I've got my opinion, I wasn't in that. And I understand that some people were asked and didn't participate, but still gathering that input from those people are going to have a poor reaction is essential to get before you ever put something on paper. You want them involved because that's going to be an issue. So I think that's an opportunity going forward about how we operate and maybe reduce some of that angst at city council meetings.
Well, just to follow up, to put the flip on this, shouldn't we be just as concerned about the quiet voices we don't hear that are maybe loud because of proximity, power, access? Couldn't it be argued that Northwestern University is the loudest voice in Evanston, and that after that, if you went up and down the contributor lists to the various campaigns, those are the loudest voices?
Well, I'm not sure which one of us you're directing that question to, but what I would say is that Northwestern University has a legislative agenda of one item right now, which is stopping the Healthy Buildings Ordinance. The Northwestern University is trying to essentially dictate to the city how we're going to do climate action, and what I'm doing is fighting back against that. What I'm doing is trying to move forward so that we make the decisions for the people of Evanston, given our priorities and values on climate, that's right for what we believe in. And so I am very happy to agree with Northwestern when it's right for the city, and I'm proud of the good work that I've done for the city when I happen to agree with Northwestern on an issue you may have heard something about that was somewhat controversial. An issue that by working through it, I was able to bring more money to the city of Evanston from Northwestern University than has come in the previous history of the existence of those two institutions, period. I'm proud of doing that. I'm proud that your property taxes are lower today because of that deal. I'm proud that we have more money for affordable housing today because of that deal. I'm proud that we have more money for climate today because of that deal. I'm proud that we have 15 years of guaranteed funding for our school districts that need it badly because of that deal. And fine, Northwestern agreed. It's great to be able to agree with stakeholders. And right now they're fighting the tooth and nail. And I hope you're right. I hope we're going to beat them on the Healthy Buildings Ordinance on Monday, because it's right for the city, it's right for the planet, and Northwestern is not going to dictate our climate policy as long as I'm there.
To some degree, we're sort of a split, but we're sort of the public voices and the private voices, and I'm not sure what you were alluding to, Jeff, there in the original question. In terms of donations, because those are the things that we don't see, and that's the influence that we don't see. And so I was sticking to the public commentary and such. And so I'm glad that we're sticking up against Northwestern for something we believe in, and that's something we need to do a lot more of, I think, to hold our own, protect our residents, protect our business interests here with the city. and make sure we stand up for Evanston when we're working with Northwestern.
Sort of a related question, along with diversity and sustainability, transparency is another word that the chatbot would spit out, or the AI campaign for office in Evanston. Are we doing it right? Or is this something that there's too high a ratio of lip service to action and fact? Jeff, you can go first.
This has been an issue of mine since the start of this campaign. And it's important because it underpins every aspect of government. And I think whether that's coming from you, Mayor, or staff, or any city representative, that the people need to hear the straight story. And one of the things that concerned me all the time as I was watching City Council a couple of years ago was so many things that come before the City Council that just didn't seem to make sense with the facts that were being provided there. There was information missing. There had to be another agenda attached to these things that would make more sense of it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's underhanded or unscrupulous. It just means information was not being provided. And so, again, the dictionary definition of transparency is to speak honestly, clearly, completely, with no unspoken or no hidden agendas. And that is something that you have to do consistently all the time. And I understand there are occasionally some things that for legal reasons can't be said, but in general, there needs to be a complete disclosure on more things that come before the City Council. And believe me, I worked on a staff, I know what it's like. I think there are some instances, decisions were made because of expediency or something like that. Doesn't necessarily make them wrong, but again, it just sort of fills out the story that we don't always get on some of these things. And I think it's imperative that we get the full story to the nth degree when we're dealing with the city.
Again, thank you for the way you asked the question, Jeff. I do think this word gets sort of thrown around in a very abstract way, and it sort of sounds great, and it's not always clear that people mean the same thing when they say the word transparency to each other. So let me say what I have done as mayor of Evanston that I think has been really important on transparency. We created a participatory budgeting process where the people of Evanston took a vote in a binding way to decide how to spend public money. Relinquished control from City Council, handed it to the public and said, you vote and decide how we're going to spend $3 million. We've changed our budget process. So before I was mayor, staff would work on a draft budget, release it to the public and the City Council, a month or two before it was supposed to be passed, and then only then was it time for public input. I've turned that on its head. And so we're going to have public hearings before staff drafts anything to make sure that the community has a chance to weigh in, and then the staff takes that input as they begin to produce a draft budget that then, of course, comes back to the community for more consideration. We had, I believe, the first simultaneous translation of public meetings into Spanish early in my time as mayor. And we had these budget hearings that were done in Spanish with large attendance of folks who simply had not had access to city government before. That's an important change in real access to information and giving input. We've done more things like childcare at meetings and providing food and so forth. And so when it comes to restructuring our government to make it as accessible and transparent as possible so that the public knows what's happening and has the ability to have an impact, I think we've done a great job. Now, you asked the stadium, I know I'm almost out of time, but you asked the question kind of in the tone, coming from the stadium, I would say. And I'm proud of the transparency on that too. I'm proud of the fact that I had, as other city council members had, private meetings with Northwestern. I hope if you're elected, you'll meet one-on-one privately with the president of Northwestern. That's appropriate. That's your job, in fact, as mayor. But then when there was a draft agreement, it was put in front of the public. There was public discussion. There was input. There was robust back and forth. After that, we went back to Northwestern and got more changes, put that new draft in front of the public, got more input, went back to Northwestern, got more changes. And then finally, when something was ready for being voted on, it was public for days before the vote, which then, of course, happened in public. To me, that's both acting as a leader who's being a real partner in a constructive way, driving a hard bargain on behalf of Evanston with our stakeholders.
That's your word down there.
And also being transparent and open for the whole public to be at the table.
Thank you, Daniel. Jeff, you get
I
a
beg to
minute or
I beg to respond on this one. You, in your first State of the City address, Mayor, respectfully, you said that the public, expects you to announce your opinion on the big issues of the day. And verbatim, you said, in fact, it's incumbent upon me as mayor to tell people what I'm thinking about the issues as they come along in the city. And so as the Ryan Field negotiations progressed, you said nothing. You were asked specifically, who's going to be negotiating? You said nothing. You were asked what your thoughts on the stadium were at that time, and you did not say anything. And of course, during this time, as you said, you were meeting privately with them. You did not announce a plan to negotiate. You later, after the vote, said, number one, that you thought it was not fair that you weigh in on it because you didn't want to sway opinion one way or another. And you also allowed or invited select council members to negotiate on behalf of the city, okay, individually with Northwestern. So let's set aside whether we got the best deal or whether we could have gotten something else or whether that weakened our negotiating position with them. Let's set that aside because we're talking about transparency. And you gave one example of being transparent regarding the participatory budget. But as the saying is, the cleric always wears a collar. If you're going to be transparent, you are transparent. And so I believe that you certainly missed an opportunity with Ryan Field and being transparent with the Evanston public.
Can I respond?
yes, take 30 seconds, Daniel.
Yeah. I didn't state a position on Ryan Field because I didn't have one until we had a final deal.
You could have
And
said
by the
so.
way, if I had said yes, I would have relinquished my ability to fight for more. I'm glad we fought for more. I'm glad we got more. There's something similar with Envision Evanston. Why didn't check those boxes? I'm not saying it's got to be 4 units versus 3. I'm not saying here's exactly the height limit. I want to do that work collaboratively with the community to get to the right place that's going to work for all of Evanston. I also am very clear and transparent about my vision, the direction I think we ought to go, the values that ought to shape our process. And that's what you're going to get from me. Not in a heavy-handed way trying to dictate from the beginning, here's exactly where we have to land, but rather saying, here's my vision, here's where we want to go, here's the questions I'm going to be asking as I evaluate proposals to make sure that where we get is aligned with our values, and here's how I'm going to try to work with everybody to get us there.
Jeff, do you want a final word on this?
Just as another opportunity then would be the 909 Davis lease, which was agreed upon in July of 23, as we know, that they would go out and find property for the city to lease in the city. But there was no discussion during budgets of this, that this was pending or even being discussed really, or was under consideration. And as soon as we got into January of 24, we were suddenly, the decision was out there, came from city manager, that we need to move out. We need to get out. We don't know what we're going to do, so let's move out there. And I believe that was another opportunity to sort of at least ramp up the discussion there, rather than say, let's just sit on this until January of 24, and then we're going to spring that out. And I'm sure you're going to rebut.
Only Jeff, that's me. The decision to enter into a lease at 909 Davis was done transparently in public, in a public meeting, after input that we heard and listened to and incorporated into our thinking. However, let's remember that in a town of our size, City Hall is a pretty weird tenant. Most commercial tenants that have the kind of specs of what we needed are looking at potential places in a lot of different municipalities. And that's how they allow competition between different options to help them get a good deal. We couldn't do that. We have to have City Hall in Evanston. And so for that reason, if we had said, if we had said rather than working through a broker that did not disclose our identity to the potential lessors, if we had said we're the city of Evanston and we're trying to rent City Hall, the potential landlords would have known how much leverage they had on us, and we would have gotten a worse deal. So we were transparent with the public before voting on any lease. But yeah, we weren't transparent with the landlords about who we were, because that would have hurt your pocketbook.
Just like the municipal costs that we're talking about in construction, that sort of comes with the turf with municipal things, that you often have to give away your position before you start negotiating. You let people know that you're going to go looking for something. So of course, developers see you coming, all right, and they charge, of course, as much as they can, or landlords do that. But this is inherent in the municipal process.
We're getting close to the end of our time. I do thank you both for submitting questionnaires. I didn't put them through a complete word cloud, but I did notice, Jeff, you used the word residence 14 times, and I could be off by one or two. It's happened before. Daniel, you used it twice. Either of you want to comment on that?
You're going to ruin my closing. Okay, but all right. It certainly made, I believe this when I started this campaign, and it has been brought home to me time and time and time and time again. The incredible talent, the incredible creativity and innovation of the residents of Evanston. We are so fortunate to live here, and we have such incredible people here. And this is city government is all about the residents. That's what it's here for. It's here to serve and advance the needs and interests of the residents. And so one of the things why I got into this race was I felt the city was just moving on its own away from the interests of residents and away from communication with residents. And I just thought it could be better. So I am so firmly committed to the residents of this city that I mentioned it 14 times.
One thing about being the incumbent is you have a record. I don't just have a record serving you for 4 years as your mayor. I have a record before that serving you for 8 years as a state legislator. I have a record before that knocking on your door. I have a record listening. I have a record of availability. For me, accessibility is a religion, responsiveness is a religion. And I would simply say that I hope I've demonstrated that over the course of my time in public service. It's what I do, it's what I believe in. I benefit so much from hearing from people who disagree with me. I learn every single time I have one of those conversations. I benefit from hearing from people who are mad at me. I learn from those conversations too. I benefit from small group conversations where different people who don't quite see every detail the same but have the same objective sit around a table and try to work something out. It's core to who I am. It's core to what I do. And the reason you can know it's not just a slogan, it's not just a word that looks good on a glossy flyer, is you know me and you see me do it. And I would just ask you to judge that and think about that and think about how you've come to know me over the course of this last decade plus. Have I been accessible or not? Have I listened or not? Have I included or not? Have I reached out and tried to find voices that maybe hadn't been heard before and pull them into the conversation or not? I try so hard to do that every day, and doing that is why this job is such a delight. So thank you for being part of those conversations. It lifts me up every day.
Okay, that'll bring us to closing statements, unless you just jot your own. And I believe that Dana, you'll go first, and Jeff gets the closing words. So, and then I'll give a benediction. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you for these robust conversations and these questions, which have ranged from the questions that I got at every single gathering to ones that I've gotten for the first time this evening, and that's exactly what we've come to expect of and love about the Central Street Neighbors Association. Thank you for your engagement. Like I said a moment ago, it's what makes this job such an honor and a thrill every single day. I want to close just by saying that I really do think this is a unique time, and I have trouble getting through the newspaper. I have trouble looking my trans kids in the eye and trying to figure out with them what the next years are going to look like, and sitting with other parents of trans kids who read an executive order a month ago and are just waiting now for the knock at the door. I hear from Karen about what her students, some of whom come from mixed status families, feel about coming to school. I hear from District 65 teachers who are trying to figure out if they're allowed to pick up first graders and bring them to school because their parents are no longer comfortable leaving the house. I look at our city budget and wonder what this vindictive administration is going to do and what it's going to mean. These are scary, unprecedented times. And they're times that demand a few things. They demand courage and strength and resistance. The last thing we can afford is to preemptively concede. They demand creativity because you know what? Nothing good is going to be coming out of the public sector in Washington, so if we believe in something, then we better do it here. Because of that, it demands boldness. It demands a willingness to do hard things that might be controversial, to embark on ambitious projects that, like Evanston has always done at its best, are path-breaking, like our reparations program, like our climate work. It demands a willingness to bring everybody to the table and figure out how to find a way forward that maybe nobody else has thought of and maybe won't make everybody happy, but will allow us to show a different path forward for a country that desperately needs it. And yes, I think these are times that demand someone who knows how government works, who has shown ability to make it work, who has gotten things done in complicated moments, who has relationships at every layer of government to bring every resource to bear to help our community. You guys, it's not a joke up there right now. This is a serious, serious time. I'm running for election because I think Evanston is ready to be that shining light that not only protects us, but moves us to better times ahead. It would mean the world to me to have your support. Thank you for all you do to make this an extraordinary community.
Thank you to all of you for coming tonight, spending the time with us. Appreciate it very, very much. Thank you to Central Street Neighbors Association for organizing this. Thank you, Jeff, for the great questions and discussion. And when I think about the scary times, when I think about the state of the world today, I'm glad we're here in Evanston. I'm glad we have the protections here that we do. So thank you, Mayor Biss, for strengthening those as well. I will certainly retain those and continue to fight to protect our residents here as well. But I also have a sense of really great optimism about the city. And I think that the future will be challenging, but it's bright at the same time. And again, that's because I've met so many of you out there. There's an incredible degree of engagement that the city has with how the city works. There's an incredible array of talent. People who have deep expertise on a variety of topics, from affordable housing to economic revitalization, to housing, to all kinds of things, construction, and we can utilize that to make this city better. And that's how we're going to get through all of this, by making sure that we are as buttoned up and ready to go here in Evanston locally as much as possible, by building the sense of community that binds this city together and that uses the knowledge that we have about Evanston to make Evanston better. And I know we can do it. I want to be your mayor. Please vote April 1st. I'm counting on your support. I thank you, and good luck to all of you. Good night.
thank you to both of you. I apologize for not standing up formally, but that was the nature of this. There was no podium. We had to improvise. Thank you to all for coming out. Elections are hard. Elections can be tough. I hope that nobody takes too personally any of the questions I asked. I think there's a lot of folks who would be more enthusiastic about jumping on a horse naked and riding it down Chicago Avenue than about speaking in public. And there's usually not...
I was going to say, that option wasn't given to us.
No, what I'm trying to say is that when I and folks in Central Street Neighbors and other folks who sometimes go and speak at City Hall do so, it's often, we'd rather be at home too, doing something else, but it's because we hear from our neighbors, and there is a ratio of folks who would never want to speak in public and rely on us to do it, and we kind of have to channel that. So some of the questions I asked represent other people's points of view, some of them my own points of view, some maybe nobody's points of view, but it's designed to be provocative. And our theory at Central Street Neighbors has always been that the deeper the discussion, the broader the discussion, the more nooks and crannies we look into that people haven't considered, the better the outcome in the process. We thank you for taking the time to come out here and respecting the neighborhood, both of you, for being here in person. Hope that everybody here votes, gets their neighbors to vote, gets people to be informed before they vote, and read up what's in Evanston now, what's in the Evanston Roundtable, what's on the Central Street Neighbors website, centralstreetneighbors.com, and you too can post in any of those places. If you don't know how to post on our website, give us a ring. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you, Evanston.
Such a mess.